picture this. It's July 30th, 2026.
Okay.
And you are standing on the beaches of Ceuta, which is this Spanish enclave, right? Perched right there on the North African coast, sharing a border with Morocco. And the water is just churning.
It's just absolute chaos.
Right, because within a matter of hours, you have an estimated 60,000 people desperately trying to reach Spanish soil. I mean, many of them are literally swimming around the breakwaters just to bypass those massive border fences.
Yeah, and it's a scene of, well, absolute logistical collapse. I mean, the local authorities are completely overwhelmed. Spain actually has to immediately declare a state of emergency.
Wow.
Yeah, they deploy the military, they send in special forces, literally just to manage the sheer volume of human beings arriving on the beach.
But, and this is where it gets crazy, out of all that chaos emerges this mind-bending statistic from the source material we were looking at today. Despite 60,000 people crossing that border in a single day, practically zero official asylum applications were filed. Like zero.
Which is wild, right? Because it completely shatters the typical framework we use to understand mass migration events.
Right. Usually it's about seeking safety.
Exactly. Usually a surge like that is driven by people seeking legal protection and permanent sanctuary, But that's not what happened here.
Exactly. So today, we are looking at some incredible documents spanning from historical Moroccan territorial claims all the way up to the modern migration policies of European figures, like Italy's Giorgia Meloni and Germany's Friedrich Merz.
It's a really complex web.
It is. And, I want to be incredibly clear right off the bat here. We are not here to take sides on these deeply polarizing political issues. Left, right, whatever, we take no sides. We are not endorsing any of the political figures or the countries mentioned.
Right, we're just analyzing the sources.
Exactly. Our goal is strictly to report impartially on the facts contained in this material. We want to follow the invisible strings that tie all these events together, right? Tracing the flow of natural resources, like gas and phosphate, to see how they actually influence the borders of Europe.
Because to understand why 60,000 people crossed that beach in July 2026 without asking for asylum, you have to look away from the water.
Yeah.
You have to look deep into the desert.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because, how do we even begin to explain the zero asylum claim paradox?
Well, we have to start with the bizarre geography of Ceuta itself, right? Along with its sister city, Melilla.
Right.
These are two autonomous Spanish cities that are entirely enclosed by Moroccan territory. They sit right there on the Mediterranean coast, which actually makes them the European Union's only physical land borders on the African continent.
Which brings up this massive demographic myth that I saw in the sources. Because they're physically attached to Africa, a lot of people in mainland Europe just assume they're mostly populated by Moroccan citizens or recent migrants.
Oh, yeah, that's a huge misconception.
Totally. The demographic data shows that it's completely false. Something like 85 to 90% of the permanent residents in these enclaves hold full Spanish citizenship. Yeah, they are full EU citizens living in a European city that just happens to be on the African continent.
But Rabat, the Moroccan capital, they vehemently reject that framing. They view Ceuta and Melilla as illegally occupied Moroccan territory.
Oh, okay.
From their perspective, these are colonial remnants that belong to the Moroccan state, and they've considered them this strategic thorn in their side for centuries.
Which is such a great point, because this dynamic turns Ceuta into what I'd call a geopolitical thermostat.
A thermostat, I like that.
Right. Because Spain is constantly trying to keep the house at this comfortable, stable temperature, just maintaining order on its borders. But Morocco completely controls the dial.
I really do.
Yeah, whenever Morocco wants to apply diplomatic heat to Spain, they just turn up the thermostat by intentionally loosening their own border controls. They let the pressure build up on the Moroccan side, knowing that if they step back, it's going to cause immediate chaos for the Spanish government.
And that mechanism, that is exactly what was deployed on July 30th, 2026.
So it wasn't an accident.
Not at all. This was not a standard refugee crisis. There was no sudden war or famine driving this mass movement. It was a calculated temporary policy shift. The Moroccan border police, who usually heavily patrol those fences and beaches, they simply stood down. They looked the other way for about 24 hours.
Wow. And the people crossing, the sources indicate they weren't refugees fleeing persecution either.
No.
They were mostly young Moroccans reacting to this massive wave of fake news.
Yeah, rumors absolutely exploded across TikTok and WhatsApp in Morocco, basically claiming that the sea border to Ceuta had been legally opened by Spain.
Just a free-for-all.
Exactly. So tens of thousands of young people rushed the beach thinking they had a free pass into Europe. But the reality of the legal system is what creates that zero asylum paradox we talked about, because applying for asylum in Ceuta actually traps you there.
Oh, right, because Ceuta outside the Schengen free travel zone.
Correct. So for anyone unfamiliar, the Schengen zone is the area in Europe where border checks have been abolished, right?
Yeah.
So you can travel freely between countries.
Like driving from France to Germany.
Exactly. But Ceuta is Spanish territory that is explicitly carved out of the Schengen zone. If you arrive there and file an asylum claim, you are legally confined to the city limits while your application is processed. You can't just, hop on a ferry to Madrid or Paris.
And on top of that, as a Moroccan citizen, your application is almost guaranteed to be rejected anyway, right? Since Spain considers Morocco a safe country of origin.
Right. So these migrants arrived on the beach, ran into the Spanish military, and quickly realized they had been duped by social media. I mean, there was no open border.
Yeah.
And applying for asylum would just mean being locked in a holding facility in Ceuta with no path to the European mainland.
So they basically just left.
Yeah. The sources note that the vast majority of those 60,000 people voluntarily turned around and walked back into Morocco within 48 hours.
That is wild. So Morocco intentionally opens the valve, creates a massive 48-hour crisis for the Spanish government, and then the problem essentially just resolves itself. But if Morocco is turning up the thermostat just to apply heat, what are they actually demanding? Like, what is the core dispute driving this behavior?
To find the actual engine of this tension, we have to travel south of Morocco to the Western Sahara.
Right.
This is a massive, sparsely populated, but incredibly resource-rich stretch of desert along the Atlantic coast. It was a Spanish colony until 1975, and when Spain withdrew, Morocco basically moved in and annexed the territory.
But the indigenous population there, the Sahrawi people, they have a pro-independence movement, right? The Polisario Front.
Yes, exactly.
And they have been fighting for a UN-backed referendum on self-determination for decades now.
And this is where it gets really complicated, because the Polisario Front operates with heavy financial and military backing from Algeria.
Who is Morocco's neighbor.
And their bitter regional rival.
Yeah.
So for a very long time, this was just a frozen conflict, a diplomatic stalemate that nobody wanted to touch. But then December 2020 changed the entire geopolitical landscape.
Oh, the Trump effect.
Yes. In the final weeks of his presidency, Donald Trump shattered the international status quo. He issued a statement formally recognizing full Moroccan sovereignty over the entire Western Sahara.
Which was huge.
Massive. And in exchange, Morocco agreed to normalize its diplomatic relations with Israel under the Abraham Accords.
And the mechanical impact of that decision is just staggering. By securing the formal backing of the United States, Morocco suddenly had this geopolitical blank check.
Exactly.
The international pressure on Rabat to compromise with the Polisario Front just vanished overnight. Morocco realized they had the momentum to force European countries to follow America's lead. So they started turning up that migration thermostat on Spain heavily until the Spanish government finally broke.
Which brings us to March 2022. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez wrote a letter to the Moroccan king. He officially endorsed Morocco's autonomy plan for the Western Sahara, calling it the most serious, realistic, and credible basis for solving the conflict.
Wow.
Yeah, Spain completely abandoned its historical stance of strict neutrality as the former colonial power.
But wait, I'm stuck on the logic here. If Spain completely caves to Morocco on this massive territorial dispute just to keep the borders quiet, aren't they basically proving that blackmail works?
Pretty much.
I mean, why wouldn't Morocco just do this again the very next time they want a trade concession or financial aid? Spain is essentially paying the ransom and hoping the kidnapper goes away. Did it actually work?
Well, what's fascinating here is that it was a massive strategic gamble by Madrid. They prioritized immediate border security over long-term diplomatic precedent. But the immediate fallout was disastrous. Fixing their relationship with Morocco instantly destroyed their relationship with Algeria.
It's like Spain is on this nightmare seesaw.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, they tried to wire a circuit between two live wires that absolutely cannot touch. If they appease Morocco to stop the migration crisis, Algeria cuts off their natural gas. But if they appease Algeria, Morocco opens the migration floodgates.
And Algeria, we have to remember, is the largest country in Africa by landmass. And they viewed Spain's endorsement of Morocco as a historic, unforgivable betrayal of the Sahrawi people. So they reacted with immediate hostility.
What did they do?
They recalled their ambassador from Madrid, suspended their decades-old friendship treaty with Spain, and severely restricted Spanish imports.
And the timing for Spain was just catastrophic, because in March 2022, Europe was plunging into a historic energy crisis.
Right, the war in Ukraine.
Exactly. And at that exact moment, Algeria was Spain's single most important supplier of natural gas. So Algeria retaliates by shutting down one of the primary underwater gas pipelines connecting North Africa to the Iberian Peninsula.
Leaving Spain scrambling for expensive liquefied natural gas on the open market, all because they tried to appease Morocco's territorial demands.
But this raises a deeper question about Algeria's motives, I think, because they frame their support for the Polisario Front entirely around human rights and self-determination for the Sahrawi people. But if you look at the geopolitical map, there is a massive hidden incentive for Algeria to want an independent Western Sahara.
Absolutely. The geography of North Africa really traps Algeria. It is a massive country, but its only coastline is on the Mediterranean Sea. So if an Algerian cargo ship wants to export goods to the Americas, or, to West Africa, it has to sail up and squeeze through the Strait of Gibraltar.
That tiny little bottleneck.
Exactly, a bottleneck that is highly monitored and dominated by NATO members, Spain and Morocco.
So Algeria is completely boxed in by its rivals.
But if the Western Sahara became an independent sovereign state governed by the Algeria-friendly Polisario Front, the map changes entirely. Algeria would gain a direct friendly corridor straight to the Atlantic Ocean.
Oh, wow. They could build railways, pipelines, deep-sea ports right there on the Atlantic coast, bypassing Moroccan territory and the Gibraltar bottleneck entirely.
And this is critical for Algeria's economic future. They have massive, untapped raw materials in their deep interior. For example, the Garajabale iron ore mine in southwestern Algeria. It's one of the largest undeveloped iron deposits in the world.
But getting it out is the problem.
Exactly. Getting that heavy ore north to the Mediterranean is incredibly inefficient. A direct route west to the Atlantic through a friendly Western Sahara would unlock billions in export revenue.
It's just incredible. And the sources actually refer to this overarching regional dysfunction as the cost of non-Maghreb. For context, the Maghreb is the region of North and Northwest Africa, primarily Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia.
Right.
Economists have calculated the financial damage of these closed borders and severed diplomatic ties. This rivalry is costing both Morocco and Algeria roughly 2 to 3% of their GDP growth every single year.
And when you compound a 2 to 3% loss over decades, you are talking about generational wealth destruction. It manifests in massive youth unemployment, crumbling infrastructure, and a heavy reliance on European aid.
When they could literally be a global economic superpower.
Absolutely.
If you combine Algeria's endless natural gas reserves with Morocco's vast agricultural and mineral resources and integrated their supply chains, they would dominate the region. But instead, the dream of regional dominance completely outweighs the actual prosperity of their own citizens.
It's tragic, really.
It is. Okay, so Spain has completely alienated Algeria, their main gas supplier, just to appease Morocco, which makes the events of July 2026 even more confusing. If Spain gave Morocco what it wanted in 2022, why did Morocco suddenly flood the Ceuta border with 60,000 people 4 years later?
Here's where it gets really interesting. Spain made a series of moves in the summer of 2026 that Morocco viewed as severe provocations. The sources identify 3 specific triggers that created a perfect storm for retaliation.
Okay, let's hear them.
The first was a landmark ruling by the Spanish Supreme Court. We can call it the swimmer ruling.
How did that change the legal mechanics at the border?
Well, previously, if a migrant swam around the border fence and stepped onto the Spanish beach, the military would often just push them right back into the water toward Morocco.
Just immediately.
Right. But the Supreme Court ruled that these summary pushbacks were illegal. They said anyone who touches Spanish territory is legally entitled to individual processing and an asylum check. And the nuance of that legal change was completely lost in translation.
So that's what fueled the social media rumors in Morocco that the border was simply open.
Exactly. Now, trigger number 2 strikes much closer to Morocco's core interests. The Spanish parliament introduced a fast-track citizenship law specifically targeting descendants of Sahrawis from the colonial era.
Wow, offering Spanish passports to Sahrawis.
Yes. And you can see exactly how this threatens Morocco's narrative on an international stage. Morocco claims absolute sovereignty over the Western Sahara and everyone living there. If the Spanish government starts handing out EU passports to Sahrawis, officially recognizing them based on their historical ties to Spain, it completely undermines Morocco's claim that these people are just standard Moroccan citizens.
It's a direct legislative challenge to Rabat's authority.
Exactly. And then to cap it all off with trigger number 3, Just days before the massive border rush in Ceuta, Prime Minister Sanchez traveled to Algiers. He was desperately trying to repair relations with Algeria to secure new natural gas supplies.
Okay, so put those three pieces together from the perspective of the Moroccan government. Spain is implementing legal rulings that make border enforcement much harder. They're offering citizenship to a population Morocco considers its own subjects, and they're cozying up to Morocco's mortal enemy for energy deals.
So Morocco sends a message. They drop the border controls in Ceuta for a single day, letting 60,000 people flood the beach, just to remind Spain who really controls the thermostat.
That is just wild.
But, as we shift our focus from migration to resources, we see that Morocco's leverage goes much deeper than just the border.
Right. What happens when we look beneath the sand?
Well, Morocco doesn't have the oil and gas wealth that Algeria relies on, but they hold a completely different trump card that is arguably more vital to global stability. The sources indicate that Morocco controls roughly 70% of the world's known reserves of phosphate rock.
And phosphate is the irreplaceable foundation of synthetic fertilizer. Without phosphate, you simply cannot manufacture fertilizer. And without fertilizer, global food production would literally collapse.
Morocco essentially holds the keys to global food security, and they are heavily utilizing the resources located within the occupied Western Sahara. They export massive amounts of agricultural products, tomatoes, melons, as well as fish from the coastal waters directly to the European Union.
Which brings up a fascinating legal paradox within Europe, right? Because in October 2024, the European Court of Justice issued a historic ruling regarding these exports. The court stated that trade and fisheries agreements between the EU and Morocco cannot legally include products from the Western Sahara.
And the legal reasoning there was that the local Sahrawi population never consented to the exploitation of their resources by the Moroccan state. So the court mandated that any products originating from that specific region must be explicitly labeled as coming from the Western Sahara, not from Morocco.
But the sources highlight this glaring double standard here. The European Union strictly enforces origin labeling for products that come from, say, Israeli settlements in the West Bank. They are very firm on that international legal standard. So why has the EU turned a blind eye to Morocco's exports from the Western Sahara for decades, practically ignoring their own court rulings?
It comes right back to that bouncer dynamic at the border. Countries like France and Spain have historically ignored the legal violations in the Western Sahara because they are absolutely terrified of losing Morocco's cooperation on migration.
Of course.
If European countries start aggressively enforcing the court's ruling and banning Western Saharan tomatoes, Morocco might simply decide to stop policing the Strait of Gibraltar altogether.
So they are willing to sacrifice international law and ignore court mandates just to keep the borders quiet, which perfectly connects to how the broader European political landscape reacted to the events of July 2026. I mean, how did the rest of Europe view 60,000 people storming the beach in Ceuta?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the shockwaves reached Rome and Berlin almost instantly. Conservative and right-wing figures across Europe, such as Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni and Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz, they pointed to the chaos in Ceuta as absolute proof that the European Union's current strategy is failing.
Right. They used the crisis to demand even stricter external border closures.
Exactly. Their proposed solution is aggressive externalization. They want to replicate the bilateral deals Europe has made with countries like Tunisia and Egypt, basically paying North African transit states billions of euros to stop migrants before they ever reach European soil.
But the July 2026 crisis exposes the fundamental structural vulnerability of that entire strategy. The EU is outsourcing its human rights problem. They pay autocratic governments to police the borders using incredibly harsh, sometimes violent methods that would be completely illegal if practiced by European border guards under internal EU human rights laws.
Yes, the EU outsources the dirty work to maintain a clean conscience at home.
Right.
But as long as the European Union relies on countries like Morocco for border enforcement and countries like Algeria for natural gas, it will always be susceptible to blackmail. They are paying for a service, but they have absolutely no control over the terms of the contract.
It's a highly fragile, hypocritical system. And the crisis in Ceuta proved that Morocco knows exactly how to exploit that hypocrisy to achieve its geopolitical goals. So what does this all mean for you, the listener, as you try to process the daily news cycle? The overarching takeaway here is that the migration headlines you see are rarely just about people seeking a better life. The thousands of swimmers in the water off the coast of Ceuta are often just the visible symptoms of invisible wars.
Exactly. We are looking at conflicts over underwater natural gas pipelines, desperate scrambles for access to Atlantic deep sea ports, and the quiet consolidation of global monopolies on agricultural fertilizer.
Yeah.
You really cannot separate a border crisis in Spain from an iron ore mine in the Algerian desert or a phosphate deposit in the Western Sahara.
So the next time you hear about a sudden border crisis in southern Europe, you'll know to look past the Mediterranean beaches,
Yeah.
have to look south toward the resource-rich deserts of the Maghreb to find the real mechanics of the story.
And, this raises a final, really critical question to consider long after this discussion is over.
What's that?
Well, as climate change continues to worsen, arable land across the globe is going to become increasingly scarce. The global demand for synthetic fertilizer just to grow enough food on shrinking agricultural land is going to skyrocket.
Which makes the phosphate rock beneath the Western Sahara infinitely more valuable.
Right. So if Morocco can already use migration to successfully blackmail the European Union into abandoning its diplomatic principles today, how much more absolute power will the nation holding 70% of the world's fertilizer supply have over European democracies in the climate-stressed decades to come?
That is a terrifying thought to leave on. The house is getting hotter, and Morocco controls the thermostat. So the next time you see footage of 60,000 people swimming toward a breakwater, just remember, the real current pulling them there started in the desert.